you guys, Ginger Cook here, and in our story time today, I'm going to be painting a portrait of a lady that's just thinking about life, as I've been thinking about life these days as I've been sharing my stories with you. And we're going to be talking about food fetishes, mine and others. Opinions about food, and boy, there's so many of them. So we're going to be talking about that as I paint. Now remember, these are not tutorials. We do a tutorial on YouTube every Monday, 5:30 Central, where we do a step-by-step acrylic painting tutorial. But these are paintings that have already been sold. They were from a special we did last January, or rather last December. In November, as part of an Academy membership drive for our online art school. All right, so these paintings, like I say, have already been sold. They're not tutorials, but you might have fun seeing how they come together anyway, as I tell you a little story about food fetishes. Now this is an 8x10.
Nope.
6x8. 6x8 painting.
I'm not playing that game.
Well, I get them mixed up, John. It just happens, you know?
Yeah, it's either one or the other.
It's got to be one or the other, and, you know, get guessed right, and that's where it is, right?
That's what it is.
So, right now I still have to get out a few little bit more bits of paint. So we talk about food fetishes. What do you mean by that? Well, someone could say they had a food fetish. I guess we could get the dictionary to describe it. For me, a food fetish is, you know, you don't eat certain things, you have to have certain things. If you touch that, you'll turn green and die, you know, that kind of thing, right? It's just strong opinions about food, and that's very common among people. You know, I think probably everybody, you know, some people say, oh, not me, I eat everything. Well, yeah, but you still may have opinions about things you don't eat, you know, I would say.
I would think.
So, one of the things that I think we develop these opinions when we're very young about how we feel about food. And I grew up, I was born in 47, so I grew up, my early formative years, the end of the war, and I was at the mercy of the people that cooked the food, as all little kids are, right? And unfortunately, my parents both were dead by the time I was a year old. And so the people that took care of me were hired help from the bank. So well, that's where you could put it. And again, probably those people grew up in the Depression, so they had food fetishes, things that they felt very strongly about when it came to food, wouldn't you think? So, and then oftentimes with children, it's a battle of wills. So, and if there's a lot of food drama, one of the things I tried never to do with my daughter, because it had happened to me, but when she grew up, if she didn't want to eat something, I just said, okay. You know, I didn't say you have to try it or any of that stuff. Just said, okay.
We didn't do that either.
You don't have to try it. Eventually you'll... and only because the drama around food in my house was so strong, all right, that I got to tell you, it was traumatic. Now, I had an older sister, and she was 3 years older than me, and my brother was 10 years older, the oldest one, okay? And they all had food preferences or fetishes. And I know that my youngest, the youngest of the three boys, my brother Jensen, he was called T-Bone when he was a kid, because he used to like to hide the T-bone steak bones in his room and gnaw on them later. And there's a kind of a running, well, I guess it's not really a joke, it's probably not very funny to some people, it's kind of a running thing, is that when Jensen never, my brother Jensen refused, I don't think he ever ate a salad in his entire life, and he died in his 60s, or pretty young.
That's why.
Never ate a salad.
I rest my case.
He just, he had such strong opinions about food, and it was just interesting to me. I mean, how strong his opinions were about food, and let's see. I'm just looking for my right colors here, you guys. Okay. Let's just stop already and get something out. I kind of use reused palettes when I'm doing these, because we have so much paint. I tend to have a tendency to just take a palette that's already been used for another painting and just keep adding, use it if I can. So anyhow, my brother Jensen was later on in life, and it wasn't very long. He started drinking, and it's when he could. And by the time he was in his 60s, he was a full-blown alcoholic, and the joke was the only fruit he ever had was in his wine.
The only what?
Only fruit he ever had was in his wine. Okay? And kind of a truism there, babe.
Yeah.
So, but in our family, you got to understand that they had, you understand, people aren't trying to deliberately be horrible to kids, I don't think. But this deal they made around food when I was growing up was that you had to eat it, or you just starved, man. You eat it or you didn't eat it. And I had this war going on over eggplant.
Ew.
Where to this day I can't look at eggplant and not want to just wolf my cookies. That's throwing up for people that don't understand that translation of English. Seriously, I really just did want to wolf my cookies.
I guess I shouldn't have got eggplant then. My bad.
Yeah, okay, 'cause that just, that was just something I just really could never stand. And there was an incident where I was given it one night for dinner, and I wouldn't eat it. And then I tried it, and I still wouldn't eat it. So then the feeling was that perhaps I wasn't enthusiastically enough trying it. Okay. So I got it it was presented to me 3 days in a row, till finally they realized that they might lose their job if I actually starved. Okay. Remember, they work for the bank. And so they gave up on it, but not after a lot of scolding, food shaming, making me feel bad about it. Now, years later, when I had a lot of, I had read an article about this new kind of treatment for losing weight. And one of the things it said is that if you really hate something, your body doesn't want it. And here's a thought: you shouldn't eat it. And then they had this whole thing about how if you weren't sure about a food, what you did was, if you were allergic to it or not, what you did was you fasted the night before, took your pulse, and then introduced just that food. And if your pulse raced across out of the charts, was really racing high, then that food was off. That's not one of your foods. So they said sometimes your favorite foods can be your best food, and your worst food to eat, like, for instance, and sometimes your worst. But what I did discover was that green apples for me were not compatible with me. The other thing I couldn't stand as a kid is cheese. And when I was 5, if you've listened to any of the other story times, I was brought into the home of a judge and his wife who couldn't have children, Bill and Lucille Wilkins, and they told us, they actually never adopted us, but they told us that they had adopted us, and that we were, let's see, this is right here like that, I want that. And Lucille, who I used to call Mom or Punky, so that was her nickname, loved cheese. And man, I couldn't stand it. I didn't like cheeseburgers. I didn't like cheese on salads. I didn't like pizza. Well, they never had pizza. But if there had been pizza, I wouldn't have eaten it. And they were just, you know, big haters of stuff like that, right? You know, that we didn't have pizza. Or, I don't think they ever served a hamburger, but I didn't like those either. So my food list was so small of stuff that I did like that not as bad as my grandson Spider, who apparently is worse than me, probably more like my brother. But there was this food list of stuff that I just, man, could not eat. And so at some point, my adopted mother, she catered to me a little bit with that, which was nice. Let's see, I'm trying to tell you this story and I'm thinking about colors. There's so many colors in this picture. So anyhow, like for instance, one of the things I really liked was shelled peas, fresh peas. So if I shelled them, I could have mine raw. I didn't want them, once you cooked them, you ruined them. I still like shelled peas. I don't have them anymore, but I still like them. And it's just interesting to me that that some of the things that, you know, carry forward as to adulthood, and some things, they say that your taste buds change every 7 years, your palate. So stuff that you didn't like as a kid doesn't really mean anything because you could like it now. And one ought to be a little bit more broad-minded about perhaps being willing to try things, because after all, you're not the same person. You just keep changing, and your body wants different things. And I found that to be true. I know when I went to boarding school in Switzerland, I discovered kind of that mozzarella cheese, which I absolutely loved. And I like the cheese on pizza now and stuff like that. But there were so many years where I just wouldn't eat it. And there were some food battles at our house because of it, because people have these opinions about what you should eat. And if you're not, you know, part of that, if you're an enemy, let's say, to those opinions, right? They don't want to hear it, right? They don't want to hear it. So I can remember just one of the things that, and I had another friend that she was very traumatized by dinner time. So a lot of reasons, another reason that I might have had some issues with some of this is because I was traumatized by dinner. Now, what I mean by that is that we had a housekeeper, and most of the time, she made meals, and you know, Mother brought the groceries, and she made meals, and we ate with her. But once a week, we had dinner with my mother and her, and we had, like, when I was a teenager, we had like 2 houses with a carport in between, and once a week we had to go over and eat with my mom, and she made dinner. And not to be unkind, but I'm going to be, you know, goodness gracious, it was so traumatic going over there with them and eating food. I mean, you just can't, you lose all appetite, because it wasn't just dinner, it was dinner and a critique. You know, things like, everybody stop a minute, look how Ginger's holding her fork. Do you see how you're holding your fork, dear? Is that how we've showed you how to hold a fork? what if you had to eat at the White House? You would not know how to hold a fork. Because, seriously, that's the kind of conversations that went on. Now, I just don't know why anybody would invite me to the White House to eat in the first place, but, you know, Mother had a great imagination, apparently. What if, you know, what would we do? Well, I don't know what you'd do. I'd just probably refuse the invitation just because you've made food so traumatic. I'd be afraid to eat there. If they invited me to eat, I'd say, oh, I'm sorry. My mother says my table manners are not good enough to come eat with you, so thanks for the invite, but I'll pass. I mean, I could see me saying something like that because, again, extremely traumatic, right? It just was. And it wasn't just enough that, so my sister and I, because my brothers didn't live with us, it's just my sister and I, and we would have dinner with them once a week, and then my dad he was in World War I, and also he was a judge for the Nuremberg trials in World War II, but it was definitely in World War I, and he was gassed, I guess, you know, the Germans. And so he had a very delicate stomach, so he couldn't eat just any old thing, right? He just couldn't eat any old thing. So he had a tendency, so he would eat a special meal that Mom cooked for him so that he could digest it. And then my sister was always dieting because her mother thought she was too fat. And so she had her own little burden to bear with that. And so she was making her diet food. And then my mother had read a book by Adele Davis. And so she was a firm believer in that. So she was dieting too, all the time. Whole family was just, you know, it was a very interesting scenario of all these people doing different stuff at dinner time. Okay? And it just wasn't fun to go eat with them because there was just, but if you weren't being criticized, and then she'd start with stuff like, you know, after she didn't like how one held a fork, she'd start with things like, everybody, stop a minute and see how Ginger's holding the fork. Do you see that? This is how you don't do it. And then after she, you know, made, you know, and you're just practically gagging on your food at that point. And then she'd say something like, somebody tell us a funny story. And you're thinking, I don't know any funny serial killer stories right now, and that's about all I can think about. Just, you know, tell us a funny story. You've just made a meal so unpleasant, you know. And she couldn't help herself if you weren't sitting up straight. And I mean, you got the same thing with the table manners, didn't you, John?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That was they had read Emily Post.
That came out of the book, baby.
Came out of the book, which you did. You'd better do it because you never knew
who's coming to dinner.
Who's coming to dinner, and where you might have to be invited to, any of that stuff, right? You just wouldn't know any of that stuff. And well,
at a
right.
moment's notice, you'd be going to the White House.
Yeah, well, it could happen at any moment, right? In
any
fact,
moment.
One thing Cinnamon kind of agree with me is that you have a name like Cinnamon, you probably won't have a job that invites you to the White House in the first place. But you know, just saying, and not anyway. So that was sort of the, so I grew up really with, and all I wanted to do, honestly, this sounds so crazy, and everybody wants to grow up and, this or that, and I wanted to grow up where I could be in charge of my own food, that I couldn't be ambushed by people's dinner time tastes that were not mine. Make sense? I mean, I just couldn't do that. Anyway, I just wasn't going to do that ever again. I was going to grow up in charge of the food I wanted, and if I wanted a box of frozen raspberries, I'd have two. You know what I mean? Because what we did was we ate on the days that we were not eating dinner with my mother, and the housekeeper was cooking some sort of planned meal, and sometimes we did TV dinners, they just had come out, you know, they were really just ghastly. Remember those?
Yes.
And she bought some of those in those little plastic things, and the potatoes, the mashed potatoes all just tasted gross. And I think Army rations probably would have been better than whatever came out of those boxes of the freezer section for TV dinners. But there were these little compartments, and when you were a kid, there was something kind of nice about them too. I know that sounds so funny, but you have some things that you might like, right? A TV dinner, something like that. So, but, and then so then we had that, and then my mother would. But if we wanted dessert, all the ice cream, and cookies and fresh raspberries that went on top of the ice cream were kept under lock and key at my mother's house on the other side of the carport. That's almost it's
Well, that's very inconvenient.
Yeah, that's almost a book in itself. The other side of the carport, you know.
Yeah. I mean, what's up with that?
So, yeah, no, John. Just that's what I said. What's up with that, right? But so you had to be willing to go over there and sit down and risk another confrontation about something that you may have failed to do that day in order to get the ice cream. And, you know, I never, you know, at some point, if she didn't bring it over, sometimes she brought over the ice cream and gave it to me and I'd have it before bed, and sometimes she did that. But there was a time when it wasn't worth getting dessert, you know what I mean? Because then you had to have the dessert with her, you know? And I know this sounds so incredibly screwy, doesn't it? But I'm just telling you how it was, you guys. You just weren't willing to risk that. So, and then of course so anyway, time passes and you grow up, and then when I married Cinnamon's dad, Colby, I was 18, and the freedom I felt, the total freedom I felt, I didn't feel that much freedom when I got my driver's license, to be able to go to the grocery store and buy any old thing I wanted, and just, Colby had this thing, we had a budget, food budget, but as long as it was in the budget, you know, we had these little envelopes for food. But as long as it was in the budget, I could have it. Now, when I met Colby, he had been living on, remember, he's like Cinnamon's dad. He's like 10 years older than me, okay? And when I met him, he was already established in his, you know, he was living in Aspen. He went in summer, and he was a skier, and then he also trained for the Olympic team at one point. He was a very good skier. So, I mean, he had a routine of what he liked to eat, okay? And if you think I had a few fetishes, wait till you meet Cinnamon's dad. Think I had a problem? OMG. And one of the things that I remember, we hadn't been dating very long, and I'd moved in. I was in college and moved in. Well, my sister and I had gotten in a big fight. And she had a house in Aspen. And we'd gotten in a big fight over some pornography I had found, you know. And then her husband had, he had, you know, I mean, not, you know, it was legal pornography, but still, you understand, I was just still 17 and feeling very, you know, shocked about anything like that. And then a book, he was mailed a book, and inside the book, the inside of it was cut out, and there was a bunch of marijuana in there. Her husband was a druggie even back then. So my sister and I had kind of a disagreement on whether that was okay. So anyway, we got in a fight and she kicked me out, and that's how I met Colby, and that's another story. But anyway, so, and like I say, he'd been living in Aspen for a while, and he was, he had, well, he was really set in his ways, what he was, John. Still is set in his ways, you know that? So, and he's 87 now. But back then, OMG, right? So, anyhow, one of the things that when Colby and I had been married about, oh, I don't know, I guess we'd been married about a week or two, and then or living together, whenever that was. And he had this habit of taking his spoon and clanking it on his teeth, making a clacking sound, some sort of horrible clacking sound when he ate. Slurp, clack, when he was eating his cereal. And I found this very discombobulating. Do you like that word? Discombobulating. I bet the translation people are going to have trouble with that one. And so I thought, well, he's still enamored. We're in the first glows of you know, being in love. I might have a chance to just nip this in the bud, you know. I mean, why not, right?
Absolutely.
If I say something now. And, you know, the thing about it is, Colby was smug. John's a little smug, too. Maybe all men are smug. He was a little smug, right? Just definitely a little smug. So, but, you know, again, I just turned 18, okay? And had no more business being married than the man on the moon. But anyway, just turned 18. And so I said to him, I said, do you suppose that you could not clack the spoon against your teeth and slurp when you eat your cereal? It's really distressing to me. And he looked at me and smiled and said, sure. Do you want to take the scrambled egg off your forehead? Big hunk of scrambled egg on my forehead.
I think it's a fair deal.
So we didn't talk about clanking food anymore or food manners or anything. That discussion never happened again in our marriage, was food manners, right? We just didn't have that discussion anymore. Come on. Okay, I don't want that. Yeah. So anyhow, that was sort of funny. So he Cinnamon would do it too. And then his mother did it. It was a family hereditary thing on it. Maybe it's how their mouths worked or something. But we never talked about it. And John will probably say I still probably end up sometimes with scrambled egg on my forehead, right?
I wouldn't say a word about it though, my dear.
That's right. See, because he's a gentleman. He wouldn't say anything. But that was Colby. But then Colby had this thing about food. He felt like pizza wasn't dinner. Are we out of money, he'd say, if I wanted to cook. Spare ribs wasn't dinner either. I remember we went out to pizza occasionally after a movie, but he felt that one slice was plenty of pizza for anybody to have. And to think about more slices was really wrong. You're talking about, my gosh, this man was controlling, you think? Well, he was. And anyhow, he's, so I mean, like he had his food fetishes. Like one of the things that Colby had was that he had this belief that if he was getting a cold, then the thing that would absolutely fix it was canned grapefruit juice. Not fresh grapefruit juice. No, it had to be canned. And he had a list of things that he wouldn't eat either. Just the first time I remember one time I cooked some fish. He says, can't believe that you cooked fish in our kitchen. Okay? There's no fish. I don't know, some of it was pretty, so like I said, I'll think of some more. And he had scrambled eggs for breakfast every day. And when we took that trip to the, we took this, when I turned 21, I came into a little of my inheritance money, and we took a trip to Asia for 6 weeks on this grand tour. And he insisted on, I don't know how he did it, but he managed to still get his scrambled eggs for breakfast. That was just what breakfast was for him, and he had to have it, right? Just, you know, you had to have the scrambled eggs. You know, I mean, there was a bunch of stuff I didn't want to eat either, but, you know, by that many years, I'd sort of kind of figured some of the stuff out, right? So, so I remember when we were, I don't think did I tell the story about the airplane, John?
I don't believe so.
In Thailand and
It does not ring a bell.
I don't know if I told this. Well, some of you haven't heard all the stories, so if some of these repeat, I'm sorry I'm old. When we were on that tour, we ended up going to Thailand, and then oh, it was beautiful. I mean, that was just a marvelous tour. And that could be another story, the actual tour. But Thailand was so beautiful. But we ended up flying from Thailand to Singapore on Thai Air, and by this time we were in our Jehovah's Witness phase. And one of their, which didn't last long, but was there, one of their things was that you don't eat blood, no blood transfusions, you know, you don't eat blood, and I don't know, you know, wouldn't have blood sausage, for instance, or anything like that. Pretty adamant about some of these things, right? So anyhow, we're on the airplane, and they're going to serve lunch, and they're going to have some sort of chicken. You know how they come around and ask you what you want for lunch? You know, they used to in the old days when they give a rip about what you actually wanted, right? Remember that time at airlines, even in foreigner places, cared what you wanted to eat? So Colby starts to have a discussion with them about the chickens. And sorry, I still laugh thinking, I'm sitting in the plane. That man could embarrass me to the max. I've never had another person embarrass me that much. You know, I remember when I first met John, he said, well, you're very sure I wouldn't want to embarrass you. I said, listen, I was married to Colby. I don't think there's anything you could do that could embarrass me. You haven't met him, right? So anyway, so he starts this conversation with asking them, now it's a stewardess, right? Somebody handed her some food on the airplane. She's just serving it to you, man. She hasn't got any opinions about it, right? So he wants to know how they kill their chickens.
Valid question.
She said, do you wring the blood? You know, because he'd heard that in Asia, somewhere he'd heard that they could possibly go off the rail there and maybe have something, you know, and somehow wring their neck and the blood was still in the meat. And this lady, you know, her English is sketchy at best. You know what I mean? She's from Thailand. She's on Thai Airline. That's the one that had the two planes. And we were on the second choice because the first one had the wheels had fallen off. You know, now Thai Airlines is a big deal, but back then it certainly wasn't. Okay. So, and I'm just absolutely dying because I can't believe we're having this discussion about. He ended up passing on the food because he couldn't figure out how, if any way, they were able to cook their chicken, kill their chickens. And so this was how it all went through Asia. Him questioning how, just not necessarily the obnoxious American tourist, but certainly
a good runner-up.
Good runner-up, yeah. Good runner-up for how they did it. So as time, as time goes on, they used to tell you things like eggs aren't good for you, and then they were good for you, and then maybe they served a lot of eggs in Vietnam and they didn't want people to think they were killing their soldiers, so they came out with another things where it's okay to eat eggs, and on it went, right? And it never ends. Today there's all this controversy over what you can eat. But it came out, there is a dye called concrenel. And it dates back to probably after Columbus, but early. Does that make sense? And the story of how this concrenel started was that when the Spaniards took over most of South America, right? And they invaded and everything and stuff, and then they were all those guys didn't have a lot of gold. I mean, there was some gold, right? But they didn't have a lot of gold. So one of the things they had, though, was a very powerful dye. And it was, the Europeans didn't have anything like it. A red dye. It was so powerful. I mean, it's just wonderful red dye. So, and they blocked off any access to the New World because millions of dollars were being made every year on this dye. And they did not want anybody at any time to have access to it. Make sense? If they didn't want anybody to have any access to the red dye. And so, and they had the market cornered. And here's what they did with the dye. Monks' robes were, the Catholic Church, were made with this dye. And lipstick in Venice. And it was a red that nobody could get, okay? So anyhow, there was this young man, and he'd been to some medical school, and he got it into his head that if he were to be able to figure out the plant, because he knew it was plant-based, if he could get the plant and then they could grow it in France, okay, then they could corner the market, and then they would Spaniards would have zip, right? Because he would get the red dye, yes and yes? That was the big plan.
Sounds like a good plan.
Well, it wasn't too crazy, was it, really, when you think about it? I mean, he would get the red dye, and so he manages to get an expedition going and some investors who, how there's always investors with these pot crack schemes, right? There'll always be a few investors that are going, yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea. Let's do that. So he goes ahead and he gets to not to South America, but one of the islands off of South America. I can't think of which one it is. They don't let you go. You can't get to South America proper, but you can get closer. So he gets there, and the Spaniards, then ships are going and back and forth to South America, and they're picking up the dye and everything, and he can't figure out how to get there. And he's made up some story about why he's there, and he told them he's a doctor. And they let him stay for a while, but then they become suspicious. You got to imagine kind of a Johnny Depp character here. So they're going to deport him. They think that he needs to just go back to wherever he came from. He doesn't need to be there anymore, okay? So he feigns some sort of horrible tropical disease because he knows and all the symptoms, and pretends like he's sicker than a dog. And they're all worried, yeah, okay. And so they let him stay. And then somehow, you have to read the story about him another time. They could make a movie about this. So somehow he gets over to South America, to where this is, I think closer to Mexico. He winds his way up to Mexico. And he discovers that this dye is made from, it's a cactus. It's not the cactus plant, okay? It's a beetle that lives on the cactus plant, and the natives, how they would get the red dye was that they would kill the beetle by squishing him, and then imagine a little beetle like this, and then putting the blood in a bucket, and eventually they'd get a bucket. Well, the Spaniards wanted like barrels of this stuff, so they had all the natives enslaved in squeezing beetle juice, literally beetle juice, okay? Which is mean, right? When you think of it, it's just mean, right? So he manages to swipe one of the plants, cactus plants, and he's going to expose them for this fraud. Because people are drinking this stuff for good health, the rich people, and it's just beetle blood is what it is. I know.
Nothing wrong with that.
So
got good iron
the problem was that he gets back, most of the plants were going to die by the time he gets back to France, and they can't grow it in France. It won't grow in India. The only place in the world it'll grow is in New Mexico and Mexico. It's cactus. That's where it grows. So the Spaniards kept everybody out of South America for so long to protect a resource that didn't need to be protected. How sad is that? I mean, kind of, John, isn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't need to be protected, but they were protecting something that didn't need to be protected. And he eventually, I think what happened to him was he died kind of early, and his little expedition failed. Though he did expose what the dye was made of. But this dye is the same, it's still going strong today. People weren't gonna wimp out just because it was a bunch of dead beetles, right? So today you will see it in you might see it in maraschino cherries. Yeah, I know. Maraschino cherries, right? And the food coloring for ham. I'm trying to think what else, what's in it, but so at some point people made other dyes, other food colorings and other food coloring and stuff. So there were other food dyes that came out back in the, probably when cinema was about 5 or 6. They came back and it came out that they were not healthy. You know what I mean? They were poisonous. You shouldn't have them. So a lot of products got taken off the market. Concronel didn't, but a lot of the other stuff got taken off the market. because, you know, people in the know wouldn't eat it, because after all, the health food stores and stuff, you know, people at that time started to get very healthy. Okay. So they knew that that wasn't going to be that wouldn't be the thing that they would want to do. So anyhow, Colby had a friend that worked at one of the largest health food stores in Aspen. And his great delight was about twice a week, or at least once a week, he would go wander down the street. It wasn't far from our house, our condo. He would wander down the street and go into his friends and say, "Hi, how you doing?" and everything. And then he'd say, "By the way, do you have any more of that food dye number 7? Do you have any more of that stuff? I need a bottle of it," right? Now, customers would all look around, and these very righteous health food nuts would all be askance. And he tried to tell him not to come in the store anymore and do that because it wasn't funny. And the more he told him not to come in, the funnier Colby thought it was, right? Yeah, well, what do you want, right? So the people that we had in our lives that we knew the most about, you know, I mean, I had my fetishes of things I didn't want to eat. I could remember when I was first married and we got a dinner invitation somewhere. I can remember actually eating dinner before we went, because I just didn't want to get ambushed on some sort of weird food these people had to have to eat.
Why do I feel that's just so strange?
Did that too. Absolutely did that, John. Just didn't want to get ambushed, right?
I can appreciate that.
Yeah, and I know what they were having for dinner. If I ate, then it wouldn't matter. And I think I had probably there was sort of a thing with me with food. And I would forget dinner invitations occasionally. Somebody would say, invite us over for dinner, and I would forget we were supposed to go. I know that's shocking, isn't it? I would absolutely forget that we were supposed to go to dinner. So we had this one time where I had already we'd had a big steak dinner. I'd already put cinnamon. She'd had her bath and she was, you know, ready to go to bed, when I remembered that we were supposed to be out to dinner somewhere with some friends up at their house, up in the middle of, hadn't ever been there, but out in the woods in the nowhere places of Aspen, high in the hills where the rent was cheap. It was going to take us 40 minutes to get there, and we were really late. So, and I don't think they had a phone. They lived so far away they didn't have a phone. So I said, we have to go, even if we're late for, and we have to go. You know, Colby's just astounded. I don't remember. I accepted his invitation. I just now remember, and he's just going, oh my God, right? So, okay, now I've got to get my colors. So anyhow, we get up there to their little cabin in the way up in the tree. I mean, it's just took us all this time to get there. And sorry we're late, we got lost. You know, they didn't have a phone, they bought it. And then of course when it came time for dinner, they had this huge dinner, it was very nice. All right. However, I'd already eaten, so I wasn't the least bit hungry. And I remember her saying to me, it's just that fun. It's just funny that certain things just sort of stick with you, you know what I mean? And she says, you eat just like a bird. I can't believe it, you don't eat anything. And I'm going, yeah, well, not tonight, right? Just not today.
I've done pigged out already, thanks for asking.
And then another time I had my good friend Annie Worth and her family I had invited to dinner at our house. And they show up at the driveway a knock on the door, and I'd totally forgotten I'd invited him for dinner. Just, that's embarrassing, right? Just, and they said, it's all right, Ginger, we'll just come back another time to eat. I mean, it was bad, right? But what are you going to do, right? That's what I'd done. So let's be real, that's what I did. So we talk a lot about, you know, people and phobias and stuff, but the person that had the most, I guess there's such a thing as the most phobias. I mean, Colby had his things, and I certainly had mine. But my friend that Annie and her family, right? Annie was so into health food that she would not buy anything at the grocery store. If she didn't can it or kill it, they didn't eat it. And her husband was an archaeologist. He didn't spend a lot of time in Aspen. They had a beautiful house by the river. Like I say, her husband was an archaeologist and nice guy. And their whole life revolved around food. She had 2 giant stoves, commercial stoves, in her kitchen and 3 refrigerators. And every day was, I mean, you except for the refrigerator and the stove part, you'd have thought we lived in the 1800s, the way those 2 carried on about food. It was so extreme, and I remember one time asking her what the deal was, right? Because, I mean, I thought the food at the grocery store was pretty safe. I'd been eating it my whole life, no ill effects, but particularly, of course, I was only like 23 or 24, but still, I could vouch for that I was still here. So what was her deal, right? And she went on to explain to me how totally dangerous this kind of food these foods were, and that a person should never eat them. And so therefore they did canning, and they'd go down and they'd go to orchards and they'd buy a lot of food at one time. And all of this was to prevent any kind of disaster from befalling them from the food that was out in the world, right? And like I said, she was the most, she was one that didn't find Colby's red dye number 7 joke very funny either, right? I think he brought some to her house one day, pretended that's what it was for dinner. She wasn't laughing. But now the hypocritical part of my friend Annie, because a lovely woman, and she totally believed all this stuff. And I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm just saying she was in it to win it, kind of thing, right? So she would occasionally go to the bakery and buy something from the local bakery for her kids, and then put it in the oven or somehow pretend like she'd made it. You know.
Sounds deceitful.
Well, I mean, you're going to walk, this was the thing that used to get me about Thomas Kincaid with his artwork, right? Not that I didn't like his artwork, but if you're going to get on television all the time and rattle on about Christianity from your girlfriend's house, your mistress's house, I don't care what he did, but I just think that, he was certainly, it was kind of disingenuous to use that as a sales pitch, when probably some of that was left a little bit to be desired, yeah? So anyway, Annie, she did that, and then when my daughter was born, because I knew her for a long time, when my daughter was born, she came over. I wasn't breastfeeding. That was people weren't doing that yet. They were still doing bottles, and they had the new kind of bottle, instead of like a glass bottle, there was like a little bag inside, and so the baby couldn't get air. It was like the latest thing, yeah?
Yeah, I remember those.
Remember those?
Yep.
Yeah, because like I say, we weren't breastfeeding. And so she comes over to the house, I think about 3 or 4 days after Cinnamon's born, I'm home with the baby. And she explains to me that I'm killing her, that there's formaldehyde in that plastic, and you're just basically killing your kid. Oh my God, I was on the floor in tears after she left. Chloe said, what on earth is wrong? And I said, Annie Worth says, blah, blah, right? About the baby stuff, and we're killing Cinnamon if we do that, and, you know. And he said, listen to me. He says, you know how much formaldehyde it could possibly be in any of those bottles? And I'm going, no. He said, about as much as would be in a train car, if you had a train car full of those bottles. You know what I mean? There is none in there. You know, if there's any, it's that small amount. You know what I mean? You'd have to get a train car to get like an ounce of it out, or whatever he said, right? It was all very reassuring. Yes? So I went on with the bottles, but I kind of, you know what I mean? People understand when you give advice, and as my friend Dee Dee says, advices, because she speaks, you know, she's from another country, she always called it advices. When you give advices. When you give advices to somebody, you gotta kind of be careful what you say, because you don't know the effect that has. Yeah, John, would you say so?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you wouldn't know, right, what effect that would have on anybody. And so now, and and again, yes, it's true that the news will come out on, and once, you know, every once in a while, when there's a dull story and nobody's died in a car crash, or we're not at war with anybody, occasionally they'll come out and you know, say something about something, you know, so that you'd, you know, and they might make a food comment. That's one of their things they like to do. And so Annie and her husband were, again, you know, they were the first, you know, they were right along with the tree huggers. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to hug trees. I had a lot of friends that have hugged trees in the past and perfectly okay with hugging trees. But she was a classic tree hugger anyway, regardless of anything else. And it was, and again, that, you know, that what she ate was her salvation and all that stuff, right? That all of that took such precedent. But the problem was that she had a baby girl, and she had 2 boys, and she had an older daughter that had left home by the time I knew had grown up. And her son had gone cross-country skiing with his dad and the neighbor. And they had, the boy, Tom, I had done his portrait. So interesting. I had done this young man's portrait. I was learning how to do portraits, and I had done a portrait of him as a favor for Annie, both boys. I don't know if they were all that good, but I'd done one, right? But I'm so glad I did, because that young man was stopping to tie his shoe, and his dad they were out in the wilderness, you know, out there in Aspen, just, you know, cross-country skiing. And an avalanche came down, and it hit him. And he was buried in the snow. And his dad and neighbor rushed back to try and unbury him, to no avail. And he was like 11 or 12 years old, and he died. Now, not to, to make a bum on the story, but then, not too many, like maybe the following year, her daughter, the baby, she's like 3, Aspen's at 8,000 feet. And so it's very high altitude. And pneumonia was, her baby got sick with a respiratory illness. And so she was at the hospital, and she caught that, and her lungs filled up with fluid. And even at the hospital, that didn't help. She died. So in the course of a year, Annie lost 2 of her children to unforeseen circumstances. She'd been trying so hard to protect them from the dangers of life, as we do, right? You teach your children how to cross the street and
all your basic.
And all the basic things. And if Cinnamon's dad told Cinnamon that Wonder Bread had rats in it because he really didn't think you should eat that stuff. I mean, everybody has opinions. This is what I'm saying, you guys. Everybody has opinions. And that's what Cinnamon went to school and told one of the kids at school that they were eating dead rats in their bread. Got in big trouble. Though,
she's just passing on the intel.
Yeah, she's just passing on. Well, I mean, honestly, they're gonna say, right? They're absolutely gonna say what you say. They're gonna do that, yes?
Absolutely.
So, I can put this away here now. And I was very sad for Annie because nobody loved kids more than she loved hers, and that could have happened to anybody's kid out there could have happened to us when we were snowmobiling. We would go out in the wilderness and snowmobile, and just as easily could have happened to us doing that. There's no guarantees. Guess that's the point. There's just, you can't eat yourself to health. I mean, you can to health, but it doesn't guarantee safety. Yeah. So anyway, that was the kind of my takeaway from all of that was that there's moderation in all things. I guess that would be the big thing. Moderation in all things. Because you don't know, do you?
You do not.
You just don't know what's going to happen, tomorrow. I mean, I have, my son-in-law, John Cooney, doesn't believe in cruising because he just has a terrible fear that they'll sink or something horrible will happen. And with that belief, I wouldn't have him get near a cruise ship, right, John?
Absolutely not.
Because, I mean, you kind of, if you think...
That's bad mojo.
Well, I mean, you don't want, I'm not saying you create your own reality in that sense, but I mean, there is this possibility that, you'd be the exception, just to prove everybody else right, yeah?
Exactly.
I'm about done with this. I've got just a couple little highlights to do, and then I think I've created my girl thinking, but I think this was a good painting for a day when we're all thinking about things, don't you think? No pun intended, yes?
A lot of thinking going on here.
A lot of thinning. Remember that? I'll do the thinning around here, Baba Louie, and don't you forget it. Yeah, so just a few little more color value changes on all of this, but great fun. I've been wanting to paint this picture. We have a lot of little 6x8 canvases that got sold, and I needed to be doing a few. And this one sort of went with the story, I thought, in a way, just thinking about things. Because I'm not saying that what they're saying, you know what I mean? It's just, they're coming up with new stuff all the time, and, you know, and I would not want to discount it, you know? See where that black thing goes. I just wouldn't want to discount it, but because you don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of discussion going on the live chat about food now.
Not really.
Really?
Not quite up there, really.
Well, I can.
You're using a funny color.
Yeah, kind of a putty right there in the corner. I want a little bit of light blue. All these little kind of pastel values. And if I think this is similar to the painting that we did on YouTube with the portrait of Van Gogh, and then we did one of who did we do? Gauguin, I think we did a portrait of him too.
So.
On YouTube, if you guys like the style of painting.
Contemporary style.
Yeah, it is. It's contemporary.
Not one of my favorites.
I actually quite like it. I like it. It's just the colors are a thing. The colors kind of tell you what the mood is, don't they?
Yep. Well, the expression on her face.
You know, we're just thinking about things in life that you know, what is that? What's it all about, Alfie? Isn't that kind of the song? What's it all about, Alfie? Remember that?
Yep.
What's it all about?
What's it all about?
So I have to say that, you know, one of the nicest things about being married to John is that because his wife Karen was a gourmet cook, and really that was her hobby. He wanted to cook too, but she sort of had kitchen rights. And when he said, "I want to cook," because I really want to, you know, cook, and I really like what she had, you know, do you mind if I cook? And I'm thinking, no, no. Why would I mind that, right? Knock yourself out, right? It's like a live-in chef, man. That is with Benny's. I mean, just, yeah, John's a wonderful cook. But he struggles on what to feed me.
And I can see why.
But you can see why, because we get these, I don't know if I don't want to hate to use the word phobias, but we do get a certain amount of that just from the stuff that happens to us when we're growing up. What do we know about things, right? And where do we get these opinions from? Well, we get them from, you know, our parents, and we get them from, going to get another red on here. Red's one of those colors you want a couple of times. Want some really bright reds. what is this, a number? Primary red deep, magenta. Looking for red, something I really, really love. Cadmium red, medium. Want a really bright red here. Here we go. Okay. I think you could probably get the frame. You have a little frame for this. Let me dry this real quick. I'll put the highlights in her eyes in a minute, and we'll dry this. So John's going to find the. So if you want to know more about painting portraits, we, in our paintingwithginger.com, if you become a Purple member, we focus on. We not only get to learn about wave and water and painting oceans, but we also focus on.
Where's the gold one?
People. Yep. John's looking for a frame. And, you know, we have personal art coaching. And, you know, I even have people that just, you know, they enjoy our YouTube videos so much. And they, you know, the Monday night ones, but they still want personal art coaching so that they can improve on what they're painting. So remember, if you just want personal art coaching, you could just become a red member on our academy, and for about very little money, you get the personal attention. Under $50 a month, I think that's like $49 or something, is like practically free. What is it?
$44.95.
$44.95. So it's even freer than that. So how could you not? How could you not, you guys?
It's even freer. You're so funny.
It's even freer than that, right? John's just going ahead and put it in the little frame. That'll be fun. So normally we'd have something to show. We do these things sort of spur of the moment, and which is kind of cool too, right? But just sort of the spur of the moment. Now, one thing I wanted to do was try my Mylar here and make sure that I was right on, and I am. That's kind of good. Isn't that good to know? Yes and yes. That's a little tiny brush. So what do you get when you get personal art coaching? What happens when you have that? Well, you if you never wanted to do a tutorial at all and just wanted to always do your own thing, you can now become a Purple member, and you can just send in, you know, 4 or 5 times a month. You can send in your different artwork for comments and help. If you want to just become a red member, you can send in, all your YouTube lessons every week. You could send in a different one if you wanted, or if you wanted to take advantage of the really marvelous extra tutorials that we have in our we have over 700 step-by-step tutorials, and they're not a lot of what we do on YouTube is just we have fun and we chatter, right?
We chatter. Yeah, that's what
chatter,
we do. We chatter,
right? But in
no chatter in the academy.
But we don't chatter in the at all. With there, we just okay.
I'm not allowed to chatter.
There's no chatter. It's just me telling you how to paint some really marvelous tutorials and what we do, and we come up with new ones all the time. So we invite you to consider maybe try this for a month, see what happens. See if you're not delighted with what happens. And again, if you're enjoying our story time, if you enjoy that, if you like that, I would invite you to subscribe to the channel, share the story times with other people, just share it around. These are I think they're sort of a fun, a lot of people just listen to them as they're painting, just a, story in the background. Maybe some people find it sort of interesting. I'm going to go ahead and just do this. Acrylics dry darker, so then you can appreciate what has to happen there. So, all right, you guys, this was so fun. So enjoyed your company this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed mine. And we'll see you next Monday for a step-by-step tutorial on YouTube, or hang out in our Facebook club and see what everybody's painting. Acrylic painting with what's our Facebook thing, John? I can never remember now. I started off kind of remembering.
I think you can Google. Well, I think you just go to Facebook. If you put in gingercooklive, it'll come up.
Yeah, gingercooklive, on Facebook.
Just search gingercooklive, it'll pop up. No dots, no nothing. You and your dots. You dyed everything.
Yeah, no dots. All right, this was great fun. I'm just about ready to say goodbye. I'm going to put the red slash through the...
Oh, that's it then. Once that red slash goes through, it's all over.
So thanks for watching, and we'll see you down the road next story time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Love to know what you guys thought of this one.